Hello, I'm Neil, and welcome back to Parallax Retros, where we'll be discussing what works well and not so well with Mega Man X, originally for the Super Nintendo, exploring the game's development and the people and ideas that shaped it. Mega Man X was developed by Capcom for the Super Nintendo as a high-speed, 16-bit evolution of their classic action platforming franchise. In the game you control X, a Reploid with infinite potential as you run, jump and dash through industrial stages to defeat 8 rogue maverick bosses and claim their unique weapons to use against them. The development of Mega Man X at Capcom represented a strategic shift intended to move the franchise towards a more mature, hardware-pushing experience on the Super Nintendo. The game's design process was led by Keiji Inafune, who served as the planner. His philosophy was to create a game that felt distinct from the original series, which he felt had become too cute. The character Zero was actually the first design completed for the project. Inafune originally intended for the red-armoured, long-haired robot to be the main hero. However, concerns that players wouldn't recognise a Mega Man game without a blue protagonist led to the creation of X, with Zero being relegated to a mentor role. The game's narrative moved away from robots toward Reploids, machines with human-like souls. This allowed the team to explore themes of choice and rebellion. The antagonists, known in Japan as Irregulars, or Mavericks, were designed to be former comrades who had gone bad. Unlike the character from the original games who gained powers from only bosses, Inafune wanted X to physically evolve, leading to the inclusion of hidden armour capsules that granted permanent upgrades, such as the ability to break blocks with his head or reduce damage. Sho Tsuge, the game's director, focused on utilising the 16-bit hardware to expand the player's mobility and environmental interaction. A major point of internal debate was the dash mechanic. Some team members argued that X should have the dash from the start of the game, while others felt it should be an earned upgrade. They ultimately compromised by placing the leg upgrade in a mandatory path within an early stage to ensure all players eventually access the new high-speed gameplay style. To take advantage of larger, more vertical level designs, the team implemented the wall kick, which acts a bit like Mario's wall jump. This changed the fundamental design of the stages versus the original games, moving away from flat corridors to levels that rewarded vertical exploration. One of the most technically ambitious features was the stage linkage system. The programmers designed the game so that clearing specific stages would physically alter others. For example, defeating Chill Penguin would cause the lava in Flame Mammoth stage to freeze over, while defeating Storm Eagle would cause an electrical blackout in another level. The team intentionally designed the first encounter with Vile to be impossible to win. This was a narrative-driven development choice to make the player feel the power gap between X and his enemies, with the intention to give the player motivation to hunt down upgrades. The soundtrack was a collaborative effort by Capcom's internal sound team, Alflura. The composers purposefully moved away from the pop music style of the NES era, instead aiming for a hard rock and heavy metal sound to match the game's more industrial and serious tone. Utilising the Super Nintendo's Sony SPC700 sound chip, the team focused on creating convincing, distorted guitar samples. They wanted the music to sound like a live band, using driving percussion and power chords to heighten the intensity of the boss battles and high-speed dashing. Each boss was given a theme designed to reflect their specific environment and personality. A carryover from the original series, but executed with the more complex layering possible on 16-bit hardware. I'm experiencing Mega Man X for the first time through the Capcom collection on the Evercade EXP. Now there's a bit of irony here. The Evercade is a system built on an ecosystem of physical cartridges, yet this collection is digitally locked to the hardware. It's disappointing that newer Evercade owners are locked out of this experience. That said, purely from a performance standpoint, the game is stunning. It looks incredibly sharp on the handheld and scales well when output to TV. Now for my retrospective look at the game. On startup, you are introduced to X, detailing his arsenal and teasing optional upgrades, which you will find later in the game. A siren sounds and a letter is displayed from X's designer, warning that X is a free-thinking AI that may eventually turn on the human race, a fact we won't know for 30 years. This works well at distinguishing X from the previous incarnations of Mega Man, as well as indicating to the player that they will be given freedom to choose how to progress and upgrade this game's version of the character, whilst also suggesting a potentially villainous or dark side to X in future games. You then jump straight into the opening stage, which is a masterclass in how to introduce players to the game's mechanics without it feeling like a tutorial. Enemies are high up, meaning you are forced to find out how to jump and shoot to defeat them. At times the stage falls from beneath you, meaning you have to figure out how to use the wall kick to traverse vertically. Most enemies drop health, keeping the level difficulty easy as an introduction, but also indicating to the player what health drop sprites look like. The rolling spikes can only be defeated from charge blasts and hurl at you with speed, encouraging you to charge your weapon ahead of time. The opening stage ends in a boss fight that you are unable to win, where you are promptly saved by the heroic Zero, where he is set up as your mentor, setting you off on the path to become more powerful to defeat this yet unnamed enemy. The opening stage works extremely well, setting up the game's story, as well as acting as a tutorial in disguise, breaking the player in gently to the game's various mechanics. On completing the opening stage, you are then thrust into the part of the game where you can choose the stage order and experience the stage linkage mechanic depending on the order you tackle the levels. Seeing your progress in one level affect another stage works well at making you feel part of a wider world. What works not so well is the design decision to introduce the dash in a specific stage that you may or may not tackle first. I died so many times trying to defeat the Octopult, as defeating bosses without the dash is very difficult. I then continued to make my way through the different levels, acquiring the various weapon upgrades for X. I found that some bosses were harder than others, eventually realising that the bosses tended to have a weakness towards certain weapons. For example, the armoured armadillo loses his armour when hit with the electric spark, making the fight much easier. Once you realise that each boss has a weakness, this works well at incentivising the player to experiment with different weapons and also giving you the option to jump to another stage if a boss is too challenging. X's expanding arsenal isn't just about raw firepower, it brings a level of tactical utility I didn't expect. The boomerang cutter, for instance, acts as a tool for retrieving distant items, while the fire wave can actually freeze certain mechanical enemies in place. Discovering that these weapons have secondary functions adds a layer of experimentation, working well at introducing subtle puzzle elements that keep the gameplay from ever feeling one-dimensional. Another mechanic that took me far too long to figure out is the dash jump, where you time a dash and jump button press at the same time, allowing you to evade boss attacks more easily and jump over long distances. I did reference the manual to see what movesets I had, but this doesn't detail the dash jump, which I feel is a little harsh. The Amiga manuals from the last 4 games I've played were explicit in the art of the possible, something this game does not so well. The final stages of the game switch back to a linear model, which I at first found too challenging as I had not collected anywhere near enough upgrades. This encouraged me to revisit previously cleared levels to find heart tanks that increase health, and sub-tanks that act as an additional health resource. Moving back to explore these previously completed levels was fun and a relief from the tougher final stages, working well at switching my mindset to that of puzzle solving rather than pure platforming and shooting. Once I had these upgrades, the final stages, while still very tough, were more manageable, especially once I'd mastered the dash jump and obtained the Z-Buster, which I later found out could be obtained earlier on if I'd acquired the right power-ups. Another upgrade that I missed, but wasn't privy to until a Google search, was the Hadouken from Street Fighter, which can only be obtained by reaching a hidden platform on the Storm Eagle stage 5 times. The Hadouken disappears on a game reset even if you enter the progress password, but it's extremely powerful, defeating enemies and most bosses in one shot. The soundtrack is quite simply magnificent, earning 2 works wells. It sits right alongside 16-bit heavyweights like Sonic 3. There isn't a weak track in the bunch, but for me, the standouts are Spark Mandrill, which feels like one continuous heavy metal guitar solo, Sting Chameleon, which captures that same funky disco energy you'd find on the Genesis, and and Storm Eagle, whose high-tempo riffs feel like they were ripped straight out of Top Gun. The narrative of Mega Man X works well because it replaces the static villain of the week formula with a coming-of-age story that uses gameplay mechanics to tell a tale of earned maturity. By opening with a scripted defeat at the hands of Vile, the game establishes a tangible power gap that transforms the player's progression into a personal quest for strength rather than a simple series of levels. This journey is physically represented through the armour parts hidden by Dr. Light, which allow X to literally evolve and surpass his mentor Zero. The emotional weight of this infinite potential peaks when Zero sacrifices himself in Sigma's palace. His death is not just a cinematic event, but a passing of the torch, where he hands X his own arm cannon, ensuring the player feels X's transition from a vulnerable student to the world's most powerful hope. In conclusion, this game really took me by surprise. I was expecting to have more in common with Mario or Sonic games, but its tough boss battles, encouragement of exploration, and storytelling have more in common with games like Hollow Knight than its other 16-bit platformer counterparts. It scratched that same itch for me, and I'm keen to experience its sequels. What are your retrospections of Mega Man X? Should I try out the sequels? Does X ever turn bad as his creator feared he would? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. This has been a Parallax retrospective. Thank you for watching.